The political landscape in the United States has always been dramatic, but few moments have captured the raw mix of chaos, entertainment, and seriousness like the recent spectacle where Representative Jasmine Crockett dropped a bombshell revelation live on television, a revelation so startling and bold that it sent shockwaves across the political spectrum and left Donald Trump and his daughter Ivanka visibly rattled, their reactions becoming a viral subject of analysis across newsrooms, social media, and political commentary outlets, because what happened on that night was not just another partisan fight but rather a moment that embodied the deep clash between traditional political dynasties and the new generation of fiery, unafraid lawmakers who refused to bow down, and Crockett, known for her sharp tongue, fearless questioning, and refusal to sugarcoat the truth, emerged in that broadcast as someone capable of standing toe-to-toe with some of the most powerful political figures in America, someone who could break through the noise and lay bare truths that others hesitate to say aloud, and this is precisely why her remarks were so explosive. They touched on Trump's legacy, Ivanka's influence, and the hidden dynamics behind the glossy image of power the Trump family tries to project, creating a situation where the careful media strategies of the former president and his daughter collapsed under the weight of a single unfiltered outburst that resonated with millions watching at home, people who have grown tired of polished spin and hunger for someone willing to break the fourth wall of politics. And in that long and tense moment, Trump and Ivanka, usually able to maintain a carefully crafted composure, appeared shaken, thrown off their script, and even angry, which of course only fueled the perception that Crockett's bombshell had landed exactly where it hurt the most, in the fragile underbelly of an empire built on branding, image management, and a constant effort to rewrite narratives in their favor, because when someone pierces through that veil with raw accusations and carefully laid out facts, the whole edifice starts to tremble, and for Trump and Ivanka, this was not just a political disagreement, it was a personal humiliation broadcast for the entire world to see, sparking an avalanche of reactions, with supporters and critics alike dissecting every second of the clip, every twitch of Trump's eyebrow, every tight smile from Ivanka, every fiery glance from Crockett, because in the age of viral politics, perception can be more powerful than policy, and here perception was devastating for the Trumps, while Crockett's star only rose higher, her authenticity becoming her shield and her weapon, her ability to say it like it is, making her a folk hero for those who feel silenced by the weight of establishment politics, and to understand why this one television moment became such a cultural earthquake, we have to examine not only the words Crockett chose but also the context in which she delivered them, the fragile position of Trump in his post-presidency phase, the way Ivanka has tried to distance herself at times while also staying relevant in political and business circles, and the broader fatigue the American public feels when it comes to political dynasties that appear to put their personal gain ahead of the public good, because Crockett's accusation struck a nerve precisely because it reflected what many already suspected but rarely heard voiced so plainly on a mainstream platform, and when truth and performance intersect in such a way, the results can reshape narratives overnight, causing allies to rethink strategies, causing enemies to regroup, and causing ordinary citizens to re-evaluate who is really fighting for them, which is why the fallout from this event has been so intense, stretching beyond that single broadcast and into weeks of commentary, memes, late-night comedy monologues, and policy debates, proving that sometimes one sharp sentence can matter more than 100 carefully drafted press releases, and it is in this raw power of rhetoric where Jasmine Crockett has proven herself formidable, because she did not stumble into the spotlight by accident but rather stepped into it with deliberate courage, knowing that challenging Trump and Ivanka head-on would bring both risks and rewards, and yet she embraced the moment fully, speaking in a way that blended fact, emotion, and unflinching critique, leaving her opponents scrambling, and as Trump and Ivanka attempted damage control in the hours and days that followed, their very overreactions confirmed the strength of her words, because if what she said was trivial, they would have brushed it off, but instead they went nuts, responding in scattered interviews, posting defensive messages online, and even attempting to spin the narrative by calling her comments baseless or partisan, yet every attempt seemed only to amplify Crockett's original point, giving her an even larger platform, as political analysts noted the irony that in trying to silence her, they made her message impossible to ignore, and so this moment has entered the archive of modern American political drama as one of those instances where the underdog strikes a blow that reverberates far beyond the original battlefield, reminding us that the future of politics may well belong to those who can master not just policy but performance, not just negotiation but narrative, and in that sense, Crockett's bombshell was not only about Trump and Ivanka but about the shifting balance of power in America's political discourse, the hunger for authenticity, the craving for leaders who are not afraid to disrupt the script, and the inability of traditional power figures to control the story when faced with a rival who refuses to play by their rules, and as the dust settles, what remains is the undeniable truth that something cracked open that night, something that revealed the vulnerability of even the most media-savvy political dynasty when faced with a new kind of challenger who brings raw honesty to the stage without fear of reprisal, and that, perhaps more than any specific allegation, is why Trump and Ivanka went nuts, because in their world, control of the narrative is everything, and to lose it so spectacularly, live on air, is the one thing they cannot tolerate, and yet it happened, and the echoes of that moment continued to reverberate in ways they may not have anticipated, reshaping not only their own reputations but also the career trajectory of Jasmine Crockett, who has now firmly established herself as a political force to be reckoned with. Her rise in that instant was not just about scoring points against a former president or embarrassing his daughter, it was about showing that a different style of politics could cut through the noise, and Crockett's style, direct, sharp, unapologetically confrontational, struck a chord in an era where many Americans feel that politicians tiptoe around the truth, avoiding offense at the cost of honesty, and this difference became even more apparent when contrasted with Ivanka Trump, whose carefully manicured public image has always relied on poise, glamour, and an air of untouchable calm, a strategy that works well in glossy magazines or orchestrated campaign appearances but crumbles under the heat of live confrontation, especially when someone like Crockett pushes past the platitudes and demands accountability, and Ivanka's reactions, subtle but visible to millions, betrayed that tension, showing that behind the polished smile there was discomfort, a crack in the brand that has been so carefully maintained, and this is why the clip of that exchange replayed endlessly online, because viewers could sense the authenticity of Crockett's anger and the manufactured quality of the Trump's defenses, and in today's hyper-connected media environment, authenticity wins every time, no matter how uncomfortable it may be for those in power. And the irony is that Trump himself once rose to political dominance by presenting himself as authentic, the outsider who told it like it is, but over time that image has eroded, chipped away by scandal after scandal, by the repetition of exaggerated claims and unfulfilled promises, until now, when someone like Crockett can seize the mantle of truth-teller simply by refusing to play the game as it has always been played, and this shift reveals a deeper change in American politics, one that the Trump family may struggle to adapt to, because while they are masters of brand control, they are less adept at handling raw confrontation that cannot be neatly spun into talking points, and every moment of visible frustration from Trump and Ivanka only confirmed that they had been caught off guard, because the worst thing for a political dynasty is not being attacked but being exposed, shown in real time to be vulnerable, human, flawed, and unable to dominate the room, and Crockett's Bombshell achieved that with surgical precision, not by shouting louder but by cutting deeper, by laying bare contradictions that had been papered over by years of media spin, and it is important to note that the resonance of this moment went far beyond partisanship, because even some who have supported Trump in the past found themselves quietly acknowledging that Crockett got him good, that she hit a nerve, and such acknowledgments, even whispered, signal a potential shift in how the public perceives strength, because Trump has built his entire persona on projecting dominance, yet here he was, rattled on live TV, his composure cracking, and that image is hard to repair once it's been punctured, no matter how many rallies, speeches, or statements follow, and for Ivanka, who has tried carefully to remain palatable to audiences beyond her father's hardcore base, the association with that visible frustration and defensive posture may have been even more damaging, because her brand depends on transcending the ugliness of politics, and Crockett dragged her right into the mud, forcing her to show sides of herself she prefers to keep hidden. And while Trump's base may forgive almost anything, Ivanka's broader appeal relies on maintaining a delicate balance, and Crockett upset that balance in seconds, exposing the fragility of the Trump image machine, which is why the fallout was so intense, why commentators across networks rushed to interpret the moment, why social media erupted with memes and analysis, because everyone could sense that something real had broken through, and in politics, reality is both rare and powerful, capable of shifting narratives faster than any press strategy. And Crockett's success here lies in her ability to weaponize that reality, to use her authenticity as a blade that slices through pretense, leaving even the most powerful scrambling to respond, and as the weeks have passed, we have seen how the aftershocks of that night continue to ripple, with Trump and Ivanka still fielding questions about it, still trying to spin the narrative, but the more they talk, the clearer it becomes that they are on the defensive, and being on the defensive is unfamiliar territory for them, a family that has thrived on aggression and projection, a family that has always preferred to attack rather than absorb attacks, and yet here they are, reacting, explaining, clarifying, all signs that Crockett's blow landed exactly as intended, shifting them from the role of controllers to the role of respondents, and in politics, that shift of power is everything, because when you are responding, You are no longer setting the agenda, and the Trumps have built their dominance precisely on agenda setting, on controlling the conversation, which is why losing control, even for a moment, is so devastating for their brand, and Crockett understood this instinctively, which is why her bombshell was not just a rant but a carefully timed, deliberately framed act of political theater, one that will likely be studied by strategists for years to come as an example of how a single moment, if executed well, can cut deeper than months of campaigning. And this brings us to the broader implications of that exchange, because in exposing Trump and Ivanka, Crockett also exposed the fragility of political image-making itself, reminding audiences that no matter how carefully someone is packaged, the truth, when spoken boldly, can disrupt everything, and that lesson will not be lost on future challengers, who now see in Crockett a model for how to break through the noise and claim space in a media environment that often seems rigged in favor of the powerful. And perhaps this is why the Trumps went so nuts in the aftermath, not only because of the immediate sting of humiliation but because they could sense the precedent being set, a precedent that empowers their rivals and diminishes their own aura of invincibility, a precedent that suggests their once unshakable dominance in the media arena may no longer be guaranteed, and if that is true, then the balance of power in American political storytelling may already be shifting away from them. The power of that precedent cannot be underestimated, because politics in the United States has always been about performance as much as it is about policy, and while traditional figures have relied on long speeches, carefully crafted statements, and endless campaign ads, the modern battlefield is live television and viral clips, short bursts of authenticity that travel faster and last longer in the public imagination than any press release, and Jasmine Crockett's bombshell landed squarely in that space, generating a clip that spread like wildfire across TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, and even mainstream late-night shows, each platform amplifying her words in slightly different ways, some focusing on the sheer audacity of calling out Trump and Ivanka so directly, others analyzing the visible discomfort in their body language, and still others remixing the moment into satire and memes that reached audiences far beyond traditional politics, which means that Crockett's influence multiplied beyond the original event, seeping into popular culture in ways that Trump himself once mastered but now found being used against him. And that inversion is part of what made the reaction so extreme, because Trump has always prided himself on owning the news cycle, bending every narrative to his will, and Ivanka has always been shielded by a kind of elite glamour that kept her slightly above the fray, but Crockett dragged both of them into the raw, unfiltered chaos of viral media, where control is impossible and interpretation belongs to the crowd, and in that arena, authenticity is currency, and Crockett had it in spades, while Trump and Ivanka suddenly looked like relics of an older performance style, struggling to recalibrate in a world that no longer buys the same script, and this is why their overreaction seemed so desperate, because for once they were not leading the narrative but chasing it, responding to it, and as any strategist will tell you, once you're chasing the story, you've already lost the advantage, and in politics, advantage is everything, which is why Crockett's boldness was not just rhetorical but strategic, a calculated risk that turned into an undeniable win. And yet what makes her moment so powerful is that it did not feel calculated, it felt real, raw, urgent, and that emotional resonance cannot be faked, no matter how many consultants or speechwriters you employ, because viewers can tell the difference, they can sense when someone is speaking from the gut rather than reading from a script, and Crockett's gut-level fire lit up the screen in a way that reminded people of why they pay attention to politics in the first place, not for the endless policy jargon but for those flashes of truth that cut through the noise, and in this way, Crockett became more than just a politician that night. She became a symbol, a vessel for the frustrations and hopes of millions who are tired of being gaslit by polished elites, tired of being told to ignore what they can plainly see, tired of the performance politics that prioritizes optics over substance, and in that sense her bombshell was as much about the people as it was about Trump and Ivanka, because when she spoke, she voiced what many had been thinking but few had the platform to say, and that gave her words a democratic power. A sense that this was not just one politician talking to another but a citizen speaking truth to power on behalf of countless others, and that is why the clip resonated so deeply, because it tapped into a broader cultural mood, a hunger for authenticity, for confrontation, for accountability, and Trump and Ivanka's inability to effectively respond only deepened that resonance, showing that the old playbook may no longer work in this new media age, and this realization must have stung them both, because their dominance has always rested on their ability to control the playbook, to dictate the rules of engagement, but Crockett refused to play by those rules, and in doing so, she flipped the script entirely, leaving them exposed, scrambling, and visibly irritated, which for their opponents was a victory in itself, because in politics perception is often more important than fact, and the perception created that night was devastating, Trump looked rattled, Ivanka looked uncomfortable, and Crockett looked fearless, and that snapshot has a way of sticking in the public imagination, shaping how future moments are interpreted, and so the longer-term consequence of this event is not just the viral buzz but the shifting of roles in the narrative, where Crockett is now seen as a truth-teller, while Trump and Ivanka are seen as fragile, and this inversion will have ripple effects in debates, campaigns, and media appearances to come, because every time they appear, audiences will remember that one time they were caught off guard, and memory, once planted, is hard to erase, no matter how many speeches or ads try to override it, and in this way, Crockett's bombshell continues to haunt them, a reminder that even the most powerful can be undone by a single moment of authenticity, and the political world has taken note, with allies praising her courage and rivals acknowledging, however reluctantly, that she struck a blow that landed, and for Trump and Ivanka, that acknowledgement is salt in the wound, because their entire strategy depends on denying weakness, yet here is a weakness that cannot be denied, captured on video, replayed endlessly, etched into the collective consciousness, and the more they try to deny it, the more it spreads, the more it lingers, the more it defines them, and that is the essence of why they went nuts, why their responses seemed frantic, why their anger was palpable, because deep down they understood that something irreversible had happened, something that not even their vast media machinery could fully undo, and that understanding, more than the words themselves, is what made them unravel, because for people who thrive on control, the loss of it is unbearable, and Crockett delivered that loss in the most public way possible, ensuring that its sting would last not just days but potentially years, shaping the way history remembers this chapter of American politics. The reverberations of that night have continued to shape the political atmosphere in ways that reveal just how fragile the carefully constructed narratives of power really are, because while Trump and Ivanka attempted to regain their footing through interviews, public appearances, and online posts, every move they made seemed reactive rather than proactive, a clear sign that the bombshell Crockett dropped had fundamentally shifted the balance, and this shift was not merely about words but about energy, about momentum, about who appeared to hold the upper hand in the ongoing battle of perception, and Crockett, riding the wave of newfound attention, leaned into the authenticity that had carried her to prominence, refusing to back down, doubling down on her critiques, and appearing in follow-up interviews with the same fiery demeanor that had first captivated audiences, which only reinforced the impression that she was unshaken while her opponents were scrambling, and this dynamic illustrates a deeper truth about modern politics, that strength is often measured less by institutional power than by narrative dominance, and narrative dominance is won not through endless repetition of talking points but through those rare, unscripted moments that cut through the haze of performance and reveal something raw and undeniable, and Crockett's moment did exactly that, showing Trump and Ivanka as vulnerable and defensive, while casting her as bold and fearless, and the reason this matters so much is that Trump's entire persona has always relied on projecting unshakable dominance, the idea that he can never be rattled, never be humiliated, never be exposed, and yet in that instant, Crockett rattled him, humiliated him, exposed him, and no amount of spin can erase the memory of that reaction, because audiences saw it with their own eyes, and once something has been seen, it cannot be unseen, and this is why the Trumps' anger seemed so intense, why their responses bordered on frantic, because they knew the danger of that image lingering in the public mind, and they knew too that their usual tricks, mockery, deflection, counterattacks, were less effective against someone who thrived on confrontation and refused to be intimidated, and Crockett's refusal to cower made her not just a political adversary but a symbolic one, representing the kind of fearless authenticity that their brand cannot easily neutralize, and this is why her rise matters beyond just one exchange, because it points to a broader shift in what audiences demand from leaders, a shift away from carefully crafted personas and toward unfiltered truth-telling, even if that truth is messy, even if it is uncomfortable, and in this sense, Crockett's bombshell was more than just a soundbite, it was a cultural signal, a sign that the political mood is changing, that people are less impressed by rehearsed calm and more moved by raw conviction, and Trump and Ivanka's inability to match that conviction left them exposed in a way they are not accustomed to, their brand suddenly looking outdated, brittle, incapable of withstanding the fire of authentic confrontation, and this recognition, whether conscious or not, surely fueled their agitation, because for people who have built their empire on controlling the image, nothing is more threatening than the realization that the image no longer holds the same power, and as the days turned into weeks, the fallout only grew, with Crockett's words echoed by late-night hosts, comedians, pundits, and ordinary citizens online, creating an echo chamber that magnified her impact and ensured that the moment would not simply fade away, and while the Trumps hoped the news cycle would move on, it stubbornly clung to them, because viral authenticity has a way of sticking, of resurfacing again and again whenever similar topics arise, and so each time Trump or Ivanka appeared in public, the ghost of that night haunted them, a reminder that they could be caught off guard, that they could be shaken, that they could lose control of the narrative, and this lingering vulnerability is what makes the event historically significant, because while politicians have been embarrassed before, rarely has a single exchange so neatly encapsulated the shifting dynamics of power in the media age, where the old masters of spectacle find themselves dethroned by new voices who understand the hunger for truth, and Crockett, by embodying that hunger, became something larger than herself, a vessel for a collective frustration, a symbol of resistance against the machinery of spin, and this symbolic weight is what makes her bombshell so devastating, because it was not just her words that landed but the resonance of those words with millions of viewers who felt she was speaking for them, and this resonance, unlike traditional political messaging, cannot be easily erased or overridden, because it belongs not to consultants or campaigns but to the people themselves, and as long as they share, remix, and repeat the moment, it lives on, beyond the control of Trump or Ivanka, beyond the reach of their media apparatus, beyond even the intentions of Crockett herself, becoming something organic, something alive, something woven into the cultural fabric of this political moment, and that is why the Trumps' fury seemed so disproportionate, because they were not just reacting to one woman's words but to the realization that they had lost control over how those words spread, that they had lost the ability to dominate the narrative, and that loss is more terrifying to them than any single accusation, because narrative control has always been their strongest weapon, and without it they are exposed, vulnerable, ordinary, and in politics, the appearance of ordinariness is deadly, because power thrives on myth, on the illusion of invincibility, and Crockett shattered that illusion in a way that cannot easily be undone, and the more they try to deny it, the more they confirm it, because every defensive statement, every angry tweet, every forced smile becomes part of the evidence that they were shaken, and so the cycle continues, amplifying Crockett's power and diminishing theirs, until what began as a single moment on live television becomes a defining episode in the ongoing saga of American politics, an episode that reminds us all that power, no matter how entrenched, can still be disrupted by authenticity, that dynasties, no matter how polished, can still be shaken by truth, and that sometimes the loudest message comes not from those with the biggest platforms but from those with the courage to speak plainly when it matters most. And what makes this transformation even more fascinating is how quickly it unfolded, because one moment Trump and Ivanka were seated with their usual confidence, expecting to dominate the space as they often do, and the next moment the energy shifted entirely in Crockett's favor, as if the air itself thickened with the weight of her words, and that shift was not temporary but enduring, because audiences replayed it, internalized it, and carried it forward, so that it became more than an exchange, it became a story, a narrative with villains, heroes, and lessons, and in that story Trump and Ivanka played the role of out-of-touch elites blindsided by truth, while Crockett emerged as the fiery challenger who dared to puncture their carefully polished facade, and once that story crystallized, it became almost impossible to undo, because stories have a way of sticking in the mind far longer than facts, and this is something Trump himself has always understood and exploited, but here he found himself on the other end of it, the subject of a story that cast him not as the strongman but as the rattled man, not as the dominant force but as the exposed one, and the irony of this reversal surely added to his fury, because Trump's political identity is built on the idea of dominance, and Ivanka's is built on the idea of elegance, and Crockett disrupted both, making dominance look fragile and elegance look strained, and when those identities crack, the damage is deeper than any policy critique could cause, because it strikes at the very foundation of how they want to be seen, and in politics perception is reality, and when reality shifts, power shifts with it, and that is what made this moment historic, not simply the content of Crockett's words but the way those words redefined perception, the way they created a new lens through which Trump and Ivanka are now seen, and as this new lens spreads through media, through conversation, through cultural memory, it reconfigures the balance of power, and suddenly the aura of invincibility that the Trump name once carried begins to erode, chipped away not by scandals or investigations alone but by something more subtle and more dangerous: humiliation, the public recognition that even they can be rattled, even they can lose control, even they can go nuts, and humiliation, once lodged in the public imagination, is almost impossible to erase, because every future appearance becomes tinted by it, every attempt at confidence interpreted through the memory of vulnerability, and that is why Crockett's bombshell matters so much, because it did not just embarrass them in the moment, it reshaped how they will be remembered, how they will be interpreted, how they will be judged, and this is a reminder that in politics, single moments can sometimes outweigh entire careers, that perception, once shifted, can never fully return to its original state, and this explains the almost obsessive way Trump and Ivanka have tried to respond, to deny, to spin, to recast the exchange as insignificant or unfair, because they know the danger of leaving it unchallenged, they know how sticky narratives can be, and yet their very attempts at rebuttal only serve to reinforce the memory of the original moment, because every rebuttal is also a reminder, every denial a confirmation that the wound still stings, and so they are trapped in a loop, unable to ignore the event yet unable to erase it, and Crockett, by contrast, benefits from the luxury of moving forward, building on the momentum, using the credibility she gained to amplify her voice on other issues, her authenticity now magnified by the aura of fearlessness, and this dynamic illustrates why political power is not merely about who holds office but about who commands the narrative, and Crockett now commands it in a way that few expected, a way that has forced even seasoned commentators to admit that she has shifted the conversation, and for Trump and Ivanka, this shift is particularly painful because they have always prided themselves on being masters of spectacle, but now they have been out-spectacled, upstaged on the very stage they once owned, and this dethroning, subtle though it may be, has lasting consequences. Because it shows others that the Trumps are not untouchable, that they can be challenged, that their aura can be cracked, and once that possibility is demonstrated, it cannot be unseen, and rivals across the spectrum take note, emboldened by the example, inspired by the fact that authenticity can triumph over branding, that raw truth can outshine polish, and so Crockett's moment reverberates not just as a personal victory but as a collective lesson for future challengers, and this lesson is dangerous for the Trumps because it democratizes the battlefield, lowering the barrier for others to follow suit, and as more challengers take up this model, the Trump family's ability to dominate through branding weakens, because their mystique relies on being larger than life, and when others show they can be rattled, they appear smaller, more ordinary, more beatable, and this ordinariness is perhaps the greatest threat to them, because for years their strength has been rooted in myth, in the idea that Trump was unshakable and Ivanka untouchable, and Crockett shattered that myth in front of millions, creating a new reality that even their fiercest spin cannot fully erase, and the sheer visibility of it, televised, shared, memed, dissected, ensures that it will remain lodged in public memory for a long time, resurfacing at every inconvenient moment, haunting their attempts at reinvention, their efforts at reclaiming dominance, their desperate push to return to the center of the narrative, and in this way the bombshell was not just a political strike but a cultural one, a moment that transcended the usual partisan back and forth and became a symbol of how authenticity can topple spectacle, how truth can pierce branding, how one fearless voice can shake even the most polished dynasty, and this is why the story continues to resonate, why it continues to be discussed, why it continues to matter, because it was never just about what was said, it was about what was revealed, that power is fragile, that control is illusory, and that even those who seem untouchable can be brought down to earth with a single well-timed burst of authenticity, and that revelation, once seen, cannot be unseen, making Crockett's bombshell one of those rare moments that alter the trajectory of political narrative in ways that will be studied, debated, and remembered long after the immediate headlines have faded. And in the aftermath of it all, as the dust continues to settle and analysts, pundits, and citizens replay the clip and its consequences, what remains most striking is not the specific content of Crockett's accusation, though it was sharp and stinging, but the visceral shift it caused in perception, the way it stripped away the aura of invincibility from Trump and Ivanka and replaced it with an image of defensiveness and fragility, an image that will shadow them for years, resurfacing at debates, in interviews, in casual conversations, a ghost they cannot exorcise no matter how many times they attempt to reassert control, because once the public has seen you rattled, the mystique of dominance evaporates, and the cracks are impossible to fully conceal, and so Crockett's bombshell stands not only as a victory for her but as a lesson for anyone watching, that in the theater of modern politics, truth delivered with courage has more power than all the carefully scripted performances in the world, that authenticity, once unleashed, can dismantle branding that took decades to build, that even dynasties can crumble when faced with the raw force of unfiltered confrontation, and in that sense the night Trump and Ivanka went nuts as Jasmine Crockett dropped her bombshell will not be remembered simply as a fleeting controversy or another partisan spat but as a turning point, a cultural marker, a symbol of how the rules are changing, how power is shifting, how the future may belong not to those who spin the best story but to those who dare to shatter the story altogether, and as Crockett moves forward, her star rising, her credibility strengthened, she carries with her the proof that even the most intimidating opponents can be shaken, while Trump and Ivanka carry the burden of knowing that their armor has been pierced, their legend cracked, their brand forever marked by that night, and for a family that thrives on myth, that mark is devastating, because myths can only survive so long as they remain unchallenged, and once challenged they are never quite the same, which is why, no matter how loudly they deny it, no matter how furiously they react, No matter how many counterattacks they launch, the simple fact remains that millions saw them rattled, millions saw them lose control, millions saw them go nuts, and that collective memory is more powerful than any spin, more enduring than any campaign, and more threatening than any rival, because it lives in the minds of the people, replaying endlessly, reminding them of the truth they witnessed, the truth that even the mighty can fall, even the polished can crack, even the invincible can be undone by authenticity, and that is the legacy of Jasmine Crockett's Bombshell, a moment of truth so raw and undeniable that it reshaped the political narrative itself, leaving Trump and Ivanka scrambling in its wake, and ensuring that when the history of this era is written, that night will stand as one of its defining episodes, proof that courage and authenticity still matter, proof that myths can shatter, proof that power, no matter how carefully constructed, is never beyond challenge.